Narcissists often give the impression that they're interested in you. They like you. They're listening to you, which you think is kind of a contradiction. That doesn't sound like a narcissist. But it's not the kind of attention where they're really interested in you. They're trying to get something from you. They're trying to get you to like them so that they can now use you, right? So the way I say it is there's a kind of a deadness in their eyes. They're looking at you, they're listening to you, but you can see they're not really connecting. The wheels are spinning inside their brain about what they can do with the information you're giving them. You can recognize that it's not lighting up. There's not a feeling of warmth or interest in their eyes, right? There's also a kind of, I'm thinking of the people that I've known in my life and certain facial qualities. And there's this kind of smile that is slightly demonic where I can't really describe it, which is why I say some of it's hard to verbalize. But it doesn't feel like it's directed towards other people. So oftentimes when you smile and you laugh, it's a social thing, right? You're responding to other people. You can't really control it. Somebody tells a joke or you hear something and you're laughing and there's kind of a communion going on between you. But the narcissist, there's something, they're just stuck inside themselves. There's kind of a demonic quality to when they laugh and to when they smile. I know I'm not being brilliant at describing it. If I see it, I know it right away.
It's almost like that smile comes from judgment rather than like appreciation of what the other person is saying.
The way to see through that tactic is this attempt at friendship genuine or not? And that's a tricky question, right? But that opens up the whole thing about being much more sensitive to the nonverbal cues that you pick up from a person. Because what often happens with women is that they sense something is wrong with the man from the first time they meet him. But then they drop the suspicion very quickly. They think, oh, he's not so bad, or I had it all wrong. But actually that first instinct was very right. So you have to trust your instincts, and you have to trust that this person that is trying to become your friend, they're giving off signs that there's something kind of cold about it. It doesn't feel genuine, right? It feels like a tactic. And we can get into that later because
I would love to actually, if you don't mind just giving us a few now.
So one thing that a man will do if he's using this kind of tactic is he's in a bit of a hurry, right? Because Jesus Christ, I don't have 6 months to become friends with this woman. I want to sleep with her tomorrow, right? So he's in a bit of a hurry. So his effort to be a friend is kind of rushed. He really likes you, right? But he's texting you, he's talking about you, asking you questions and all these other things. But it's all it seems kind of rushed. In a period of like a week or so, he's suddenly your friend now. That is a sure sign that something else is going on. Because if you genuinely want to be a friend of someone, you're willing to take your time, right? So the calculating seducer is probably after sex fairly quickly, right? Or an abusive relationship.
And I've got a quote, even the strongest can be made vulnerable if you isolate them from their nests and safety nets.
Okay. So this is a manipulative tactic. There's no doubt about it. People have their own kind of context, their family, their friends, their workplace. And sometimes if you can isolate them from that context, they become much more vulnerable to you, right? They don't have any friends. They don't have any support anymore. So they only can rely on you. And it's something that is done over time, right? So if you're confronting with a male seducer who is trying to turn you off from your friends, who is making it so that your best friend, oh, I don't think you should trust her. I think she's up to something, right? He's trying to do things like that. He's trying to alienate you from your family. I think your parents were really awful to you, etc., is a very classic technique because in your sense of isolation, you're much more vulnerable to getting support from this particular person. And so one of the tactics that I talk about in the book is taking the person to another country or to another place where they, even on a holiday or a vacation, where they feel unsupported, where they feel a little bit alone and isolated for several weeks, kind of break down that element and make them want to turn to you for trust and support. So if you feel that a man is trying to isolate you in the subtlest ways from your friends, from your family, from the place where you live, and is criticizing that and trying to make you feel like, maybe I don't like these things. Maybe that friend isn't really somebody I can trust. This is somebody you should be very, very suspicious of. It's a terrible tactic. It's trying to isolate you socially from the things that support you. And you should be very, very suspicious, and you should not give in to that.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite analogies is, have you ever seen like water that drips on a rock? And if it goes over and over years and years, the rock ends up changing its shape. Yeah. I think of narcissistic tactics as that analogy, because as you were describing it, imagine you have the person that's subtly giving you these negative comments about your family, subtly giving you these negative comments about your friends. Over time, you end up starting to question it. You start to look at something you never would have looked for. And before you know it, that slow dripping effect that your toxic partner has had on you has eventually changed the way that you see the world and the way you see people around you.
Right.
I was pushed around a lot because I was sort of a naive writer type who didn't understand that there are bad people out there. So one of the things I had to learn in life, and that are the source for my work, is that there are bad people out there, and you have to recognize that there are narcissists, that there are aggressive people, that there are passive aggressive people, that they are enviers. And you have to be aware of that, and you have to be strong enough to deal with them. And by not being able to deal with those kind of people, your life can be completely ruined. One awful toxic person, one bad relationship can ruin you for life. You internalize the negative energy. So the ability to stand up for yourself and to be aware and to understand that not everyone has the best intentions, and that you're going to be more strategic and not always kind of just accepting what people give you, was a major source of wisdom for me. And all of my books come from a bit of anger, and I think the reader can feel the anger in them.
When you first meet somebody, it's a very strange thing. Because when you meet people for the second or the third time, it's not the same, right? But when you see them the first time, there's a weird energy going on because they're a stranger. And strangers, there's something strange. There's a wariness about them. There's a curiosity. It's a different energy than anything else. And you're feeling something from that person that's different from after you've seen them 2 or 3 times, because after 2 or 3 times, you're not paying attention. You've assumed, this is what they're like. I know who they are. That first time, you don't know that. And those gut feelings are much stronger. You're picking up vibes about them. Something is a little bit off about this person, right? Something about that narcissist, those eyes I was talking about. You pick that up, whereas the 3rd or 4th time, you're not sensitive to it anymore. So yes, you've gone wrong. You weren't paying attention earlier on. Now you're involved with someone who's up to no good. So let's say, for instance, you had a mother who was very narcissistic, who really wasn't giving you the normal mother, nurturing, empathetic energy. It was more about her, and you had to pay attention to her, right? Well, that kind of creates the sort of desire. You're as an infant, you really want that love from that mother. You're trying to attract it, pull it out of her as best you can. And your energy, your desire is surrounding her with this kind of emotional charged sexual energy. And you're going to find throughout your life, you're going to be attracted to narcissistic women. It's going to be your Achilles heel throughout your life, because you want to kind of heal that wound. You want to be able to play back that initial trauma and sort of rewrite the way it ended up, where now you're going to find this narcissistic woman and she's going to give you finally what you never had before, right? It's a very, very common pattern, right? And so you're not even aware of this. And it's extremely difficult to break out of, because your desire is for this type of person. So you might meet a woman, just doing it from a man's point of view, who isn't narcissistic, who's very empathetic and very caring. And she would be perfect for you. And you may even have a relationship with her. But the excitement, the energy, that charge isn't going to be as strong as with that other type. And you're going to fall back into the old patterns again and again and again. And the only way out of it is to go back and look at your early childhood and look at these wounds and confront them face to face and understand that you're a prisoner of this kind of things that were ingrained at you at a very, very early age. I mean, some people are toxic. I talk a lot in there about toxic characters. People, those are the kinds of people who can't really change. Their patterns are too ingrained. And we've all met people like that. We've all had to deal with a narcissist who's so deeply self-absorbed. There's nothing that's ever going to save them or pull them out of that self-absorption.
Unless they have like a near-death experience or they have someone close to them.
That's
like,
true.
You know, something where it's a big awakening.
That's true.
Or they get sick or whatever, right?
You're right. That happens. That does happen.
Sometimes.
Sometimes it does. But you have to be honest that there are people out there. You can't be naive. There are people out there who are toxic, who are dangerous, who can ruin your life. You hire the wrong person. And I've dealt with in my consulting with a lot of people who hired a business partner who ended up sort of taking the business from them. Very common scenario. You have to not be naive and recognize these toxic types. And often it's best not to try and change them, because trying to change them entangles you in a lot of their drama.
And it's just never going to happen. You might be trying for years and wasting your time and energy.
But, you know, people have to be able to, to change themselves. A strong character is a person who can take criticism, right? Who can work with other people, right? Who can deal with stressful situations, who can handle responsibility. And if there's something goes wrong, they take, I am to blame for it. They don't look at other people. There's somebody you can rely on. You lean on them, and there's something there to lean on. You can rely on them in situations. A weak character is somebody who cannot take criticism. That is probably the number one characteristic, the worst trait, I think, in people, and a definite trait of negativity, is somebody who can't take any kind of criticism, right? They're so defensive. So that means they can get away with anything. They can say anything they want, and there's just like a wall, a shell around them, right? So the ability in a work situation, in a relationship, to take criticism and be able to use it constructively is an incredibly useful and powerful trait to me that reveals strong character. How people handle stress is a really good sign of their character. So in a work situation, people are good at faking it and pretending that they're very strong. But when it gets really stressful and there's a lot of pressure on it, the mask falls off and they reveal that they can't handle it. They're too weak. They're reacting to everything. They can't get out of the moment. They're so impatient, you know, and fragile. And so the ability to handle stress shows that somebody has something strong inside of them, right? Mm-hmm. How they handle power, right? So when people are kind of climbing up the ladder in a group or in a job, they generally try and pretend like they're with the group. But once they have power, that all falls off and they can become abusive and they feel like they can get away with things that they couldn't get away with before. They treat people below them miserably, etc. So when people have power, how do they handle it? Are they responsible? Do they suddenly become somebody different, or do they maintain the character that they had beforehand, right? What kind of partners do they choose? Do they choose a spouse, a husband, a girlfriend, etc.? Somebody that they can push around, somebody that's inferior to them so that they can feel better about themselves? How do they look when they're playing like a game or they're in outdoor activities or something that has something to do with work? Are they so competitive they have to win at everything, even when it's like outside of that kind of environment, you know? These are kind of traits that help me sort of judge a person's character.
Yeah, and these are often the things that we either ignore or we actually let them kind of fall by the wayside or don't pay enough attention to them because we think, oh no, but they're so smart and they're so this. And I wonder how much of that is also like, what does that say about us that we often get attracted to the wrong things within people? What does that say about us? Does that make us a strong or weak character?
I know that I tend to get involved with narcissistic people. It's a weakness of mine, right? And maybe it's because of my upbringing, and maybe it's because I feel a kind of emptiness inside of me, and that their charm and the attention that they pretend to give you is kind of enchanting or casts a spell on you, and it draws you in. Yeah, so if you're dealing with your own weaknesses and your own emptiness inside, you're going to be drawn to people who fill that up. Or you're going to be drawn to causes and charismatic leaders that pretend to give you a purpose in your life because you don't have a purpose, but they have it for you, kind of thing. So a lot of it has to do, with ourselves, and we're attracted we're even attracted to negative people. And there are people who have patterns in their life where they deliberately choose the worst kind of person for them, right? And over and over and over again, because at least that makes them feel alive. At least the pain of it, gives them a sense of something dramatic. And so they deliberately bring on that kind of pain. So it's complicated. Yeah.
When you said that often we feel an emptiness inside, and you were saying maybe because of your upbringing, you felt that emptiness inside as well. Have you tried to fill that emptiness, or is there another solution?
Well, to me, it's why I wrote the book Mastery. The way I fill my emptiness, and how I've done it since I was a kid, is through my work and through my ideas and my thinking, and how I'm constantly looking for new thoughts and new ways of looking at the world. So I find that if I didn't have my work as kind of, some people think of work as something that you just have to do, right? It's just a way to get money. But for me, it's a way to feel like I'm a human being, that I am who I am. I was destined to write these books, and it gives me every day I wake up and I know this is what I need to accomplish, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's why I read so many books. That's why I'm so intrigued by ideas. That's why I'm writing a book right now about a subject that very much captivates me, because it does feel that inner kind of emptiness. But on the other hand, as someone who meditates and practices a form of Zen meditation, there is a purpose to emptiness, right? It's not necessarily good to be always having to fill things up in your brain, like you're just pouring food into your system. There is something actually kind of intrinsically beautiful about the idea that there is emptiness, that I don't really have a self, that there is actually that there is no such thing as a mind. Actually, it's an illusion that we create, right? It's something something through words that we have. So that sense of emptiness, that I don't have an ego, or that I'm confronting the world and I'm just hearing and seeing things as they are, is actually a beautiful thing. So I have to kind of struggle against this idea of always having to fill myself up.
What's something, you were saying you like observing humans and humanity? What's something that you've observed about humans over time that surprised you?
Well, nothing really surprises me, because I read a lot of history and I see that things just keep repeating over and over and over again. I know, though, since I had my stroke, and since I'm physically weak and there are things I can't do anymore, I've actually noticed that people respond to me differently, and it's actually very positive. So sometimes I can be very negative about people. That's kind of my inclination. That's how my mind tends to work, which is not necessarily a good thing. We all have these attitudes that make us look at the world a certain way. I tend to have a negative bent towards human nature. But I must say, people have been very, very kind to me since I've had my stroke. And it's sad that you have to have an accident like that to be able to perceive it. But I've seen another side where everyone wants to help me. They kind of empathize with the fact that I'm a little bit helpless in these situations. And it's also made me kind of feel differently about other people who have disabilities or things that they can't help in their lives. But the sense of I'm a little bit helpless and people are really eager to try and help me actually is something that has kind of surprised me in a way.
Yeah, I liked what you said there, that it's sad that someone has to go through something for us to then show that sides of ourselves, which means that it's always there. It means that it exists inherently within us.
Yeah.
Do you think it's because why do you think that is? Why do you think that is, that if it's inherently there, we don't display it at all times to all people?
I don't know. I mean, we're all born with a capacity for empathy. It's something that interests me a lot because the feeling that I'm connecting very deeply to another person, let's say my wife, etc., is a very overpowering emotion. It gets me out of myself and I'm seeing the world through her eyes, as opposed to me always projecting myself onto her. It's a very moving experience. And sometimes you go to a movie and you find yourself getting inside the characters, you're getting outside of yourself, and you're feeling this empathy for them, you're identifying with them. These are all very powerful emotions, right? And we all have the capacity for that. But the world we live in is actually a machinery to deaden those emotions, that sense of empathy, right? It just puts so much emphasis on ourselves, on our individuality, on who we are, our needs, the attention that we want, that we deserve. We're so focused on ourselves that natural feeling of wanting to get inside of another person. And it's very strange, Jay, because if you think about it, our inner lives are actually quite boring. The same thoughts repeat over and over and over again, the same emotions, the same preoccupations, the same anxieties. And other people, they're so different. They have their own worlds, right? It's like traveling to another country. So we should actually be much more oriented towards other people. We should have a natural interest in their world because it takes us out of ourselves. It's like therapy. But it's been deadened by so many things in our world, by social media, by the pressures we're under, by just modern lifestyle. And so that empathetic muscle that everybody has is kind of atrophying. And yet there'll be moments where it kind of sparks to life. And you feel like, God, I want that. I want more of that in my life, more of that in my world. How do I get it?
What would you say is your most repeated thought on a daily basis?
Like, what do I need to do today? What's on my schedule? So like I'm meditating in the morning and I'm trying to empty my mind and I'm going into what's known as a koan, right? And then these thoughts keep bubbling up and they're so annoying and it makes you aware of of the machinery of your own mind. And so to answer your question, it's always like, oh, did you remember that you have to call this person this afternoon? Did you remember that you have to change that reservation? Do you remember that you have to do this, that, the other? Scheduling things. So unimportant, so trivial, where I'm trying to open my mind up to something vast and important. It's little things like scheduling and stuff like that. Then there'll be other thoughts that will be repeating, like if I saw a movie from it, images will keep popping up from that and such. It makes you aware that you're not in control of your own mind, right?
How have you found over time with meditation and other practices, what have you used in order to start quietening, emptying, whatever the right word is for you, releasing those thoughts so that you can connect with the vastness, be creative or self-express?
Wow, it's not easy and it's an ongoing process. And I could say I'm maybe 10% of the way where I'd like to be. But first of all, you recognize, you go through a thing where a thought pops up and it's like, why am I thinking about that? I don't like it. You realize that it's just a thought. And what is a thought? Now I know we're getting really weird and metaphysical here.
I like it.
But it's not real. It's a phantom, right? It has no reality. Reality is your body, the present moment, the birds outside, the sky, where you are sitting. the fact that you're alive, that your blood is pumping, these are real. But that thought in your mind is a shadow. It's a phantom. It doesn't exist. It has no reality. And so I go through this process where don't engage with it. And it's really weird because then my mind plays tricks on me and it pulls up a thought that's definitely going to engage me, right? Because it wants that. It's like a sugar rush. And so I go, okay, no, I'm not going to engage with it. And it made me realize as I went through that process that this is what social media is based on. Social media has mirrored the human brain on a large scale. We have thoughts that are designed to grab our emotions and make us think about them repetitively over and over again, compulsively, right? And there's probably a purpose behind that. But social media is actually a genius at that, at putting up things up there. They're going to engage our emotions, so we have to pay attention. So I always try and, every time that happens, I withdraw and I say, it's just a thought. It's not real. It's not who I am. This is a very important part of meditation. Your thoughts are not who you are. They're a separate part of yourself. You are something different from your own thoughts. I don't know if that means anything to you.
It does, definitely. And while we are not our thoughts and we are not our mind, our thoughts become our reality. Yeah. We find that a repetitive thought turns into a habit, that turns into a pattern, that turns into an action, becomes our reality. For example, I am a unorganized, lazy individual, usually translates into, oh, I forgot to send that. It didn't happen, because now it's a belief that's built up. And so it's so fascinating that something that's so not real becomes so real. And I've been really into seeing how thought editing is so useful as an activity and an exercise, because I've found so many of my thoughts become my beliefs that become my life. And I think a lot of people don't realize, because they don't realize that their thoughts are like clothes that you can change. We do believe that our thoughts are real and our reality,
right,
and whatever we're hearing in our head is exactly what is.
Right.
And we don't realize that, oh, it's like looking in your wardrobe and saying, I don't like the color green anymore. I'm going to change it for blue.
Right.
It's as simple as that.
Well, there was something I read recently in one of the Buddhist books that I like to read that said our minds are basically topsy-turvy. They're upside down. So the reality is we don't I mean, I don't want to get too deep into this, but we don't really have a self. The self is a construction of our minds. There actually is nothing there. And that kind of emptiness, that egolessness, is enlightenment. It's a beautiful feeling. And maybe in your life you've touched upon it briefly. I know I've touched upon it briefly. It's not the reality I have every day, but that's real. And what's not real are the thoughts, but everything is turned upside down in our worlds. And so these delusionary thoughts about people, about who I am, about my habits, etc., they become our reality when it's exactly the opposite. Right? You have to be able to be aware of that. And so, meditation is all about becoming aware of these things, because we walk around like automatons. I'm very into this writer named Gurdjieff. I don't know if you've ever heard of Gurdjieff.
No, I haven't.
He was this, he's basically from Armenia. He was in the beginning of the 20th century. He was this man who was very interested in mysticism, and he traveled throughout Asia trying to find the essence of all the different esoteric philosophies. And he created his own philosophy. And it's very interesting, very exciting stuff. He wrote a book called In Search of the Miraculous that I highly recommend people. And it's not woo-woo stuff. He was a very, very practical man. He puts it in very practical terms. But his idea is that we walk around asleep. We're on automatic pilot constantly. We're not really aware that we're breathing, that we're existing. We're not aware where our thoughts come from. We're not aware of how our body moves, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's a process of slowly becoming aware of these kinds of things that is really I've been doing this 14, 15 years now, and it's really, really kind of changed
the course of my life, I have to say.
Yeah, I love that. And I can't wait to read that book now. And I couldn't agree more. I feel we're so disconnected from our mind and body that we constantly believe that someone outside of ourselves has the answer for how we feel. And while that may be true when you're seeing a doctor or a dentist or something of that professional nature, we don't really know how our body's been feeling for weeks or months until it crashes. And then we realize that we haven't paid enough attention to X or Y or Z, or a relationship in the same way has to end in order for us to realize that it had lost investment and energy or whatever it may be. And we're so far away from the self, or at least this version of the self, that yeah, we're not really aware. I love what you just said about the idea of how conscious are we of the fact that we're breathing, we're here, we're present, we're together, versus how much are we living up here.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because there's almost two realities that we're always dealing. And if we're getting too heady, I'm happy to move away from it. But it's almost like I've been thinking a lot about how, in one sense, what's out here is real, and in one sense, what here isn't. And at the same time, actually, what's going on here is the real, because it defines how I interact with everything else. And it can help me be a better filter, a better chooser, selector of the people I'm around and the places I visit.
So you say you have to kind of use the mind to be able to become present. It's a process.
I would say I'm alluding to that in discovery, not in pushing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Yeah, I agree with that. Definitely.
Yeah. I've been reflecting a lot recently about how most of what's happening is in the invisible world, and
that's very interesting. Tell me more about that.
So I was thinking that in one sense you have reality externally, the visible world, but how I make sense of that visible world is all in the invisible space. And ultimately, how I make sense of it is the reality that I experience, regardless of what's happening around me, which is why we realize that people we all are telling ourselves stories and narratives all day long, but how we're processing what we're experiencing is our reality, as opposed to the event or what someone said or social media, as you gave an example. Like, I can either sit here and say, like, I know that when I wake up in the morning and I start scrolling on social media, my mind is now moving 10 times, 100 times faster than if I don't do that. And I know that brushing my teeth and showering is a much more peaceful process if I haven't looked at my phone than if I do.
Right.
And so that choice is being made in the invisible world. And the visible world is simply something I'm interacting with and taking from or being affected by.
Well, so we mostly live in amid things that are invisible.
Yes.
Right? Symbols, etc.
Yes.
Language is a symbol. It's not reality. And so things like government and social behavior, they're rules and codes that we abide by, but they're not visible. They're invisible, yes. Right? Yeah, definitely. And we're not aware of that.
And so we're trying to raise our awareness of the invisible world. I'm always trying to raise my awareness of, why do I process this way? Where does this come from? Where's this idea taking root?
It's a very interesting process to go through.
Yeah, it's hard. It's not clear. It's not like here's the step-by-step process. It's just something I've been engaging with a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to try and go through a thing where I question all of my beliefs and things of where does that come from? Why do I believe that? Why has that become something that's so hardened into my brain? I believe that about myself and who I am, about other people. I continually try to challenge it and look at what might be the source of it, and then maybe say, it could be the opposite, right? And it can lead to a lot of problems, because it's like my mind is always swimming and I'm never really think anything is certain. I'm always, seeing the opposite side of it. But I think in the end, it's a very healthy process.
How do you, I love where we're going, because it kind of comes back to your same point, your earlier point about how someone of strong character knows how to take criticism, which means they know how to deal with the opposite of what they think or feel. And so this idea that you're sharing now, that it's healthy to be able to question, to evaluate, to assess our beliefs and values. But like you said, it's one of the hardest things to do because you get into a space of uncertainty, you question your identity, you lose a sense of direction. How do we question ourselves without losing ourselves and actually realize that that is the process of discovering and building ourselves?
You know, like who really are you in the end? You know, what constitutes you, the essence of you? What were you meant to accomplish in this world? Right? Your sense of purpose, you know, to use the title of your show. What is it that makes you an individual, makes you unique, that you alone are meant to accomplish in life? Well, it's not given. We don't know it. And a lot of people really, really struggle with trying to figure that out, right? Because they've been programmed by their parents, by their siblings, by the culture, by their teachers to say, this is who you are. This is what you should believe in. This is what you were meant to accomplish in life. This is what's cool and what's not cool. Okay. And so you have to question yourself. You have to say, is this really who I am? Am I really interested in this subject? Am I really interested in this kind of person, in getting in a relationship with this kind of person? And so question yourself on that level. You're getting at a deeper and deeper core of maybe who you are at essence. You're cutting away all of the social stuff that has been foisted upon you.